Hello again. Well, we'll pick up where we left off by looking at a second poem by Philip Larkin. This is called, the poem's called This Be the Verse. They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. Now, this jolly verse is one of Larkin's most famous. It's often read in courses such as ours. The first thing you might note is his rather striking use of profanity. To understand this, at least to partly understand it, it helps to know that something about Larkin's attitude toward modernist literature. He was not a fan of modernist literature. Now, modernism dates from after World War I. I guess in the 1920s, you could say it really kind of hit its stride. Modernism was characterized by great experimentation and formal innovation in literature. You think of stream of consciousness novels, and similar experiments were going on in poetry as well. This was also the period of the psychoanalytical psychology of Sigmund Freud, with its emphasis on human sexuality and the personal psychological importance of that, as well as the influence that one's parents have on one's psychological development. Now, plainly, these are all themes in Larkin's poem. And along with also part of modernism, of course, was a kind of liberalization in the treatment of human sexuality in literature. Think of the novels of D.H. Lawrence, for instance, which were so controversial in their time. Similarly, a greater freedom in poetical diction was a hallmark of modernism. So words like fuck, which would never have before been seen, began to crop up. And it's Larkin's attempt to kind of mock or parody this very tendency that we see in this poem. On the other hand, he seems to be not without a certain serious purpose here. In particular, when he in the second verse, the middle four lines, when he talks about, he sets up a kind of infinite regress. If our parents screw us up, well, their parents screwed them up, and so on, and into the infinite past. The fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern. Now, I have yet to hear a really satisfactory or adequate explanation of that phrase, soppy stern. So if you've got any ideas, by all means, put something on the discussion board. I'd like to know what that means. It's in his final quatrain, the last four lines, that Larkin becomes most general and almost epigrammatic. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. Now, that image of the coastal shelf is, of course, perhaps the most striking one in the poem. The notion of infinite series of depositions and sediment that thickens, and this is his image for human misery. The last two lines are a very succinct expression of the proverbial pessimistic wisdom. We can trace this right back to the Greeks in the story of Silenus, for instance, the satyr who was chased through the forest. When he was finally caught, he was asked a question: what's the best thing for human beings? What is good for man? And Silenus laughed. The bitter laughter rang through the forest, and he said, "Oh, why do you ask me what's most inexpedient for you to know? The best thing for man is never to be born, never to be at all. And the second best is to die soon." Now Larkin's final two lines can be read in just this way. When he says, "Get out as early as you can," well, of course, perhaps he means to move out of your parents' house. Get out on your own as soon as you can. Could also be taken to mean get out of life as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. That is, don't perpetuate the miserable history. Now, the title of this poem, "This Be the Verse," excuse me, very likely has been borrowed from a poem by Robert Louis Stevenson, whom Larkin admired. His poem Requiem. Let's look briefly at that. Excuse me. "Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me die. Glad did I live and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies where he longed to be. Home is the sailor, home from sea, and the hunter home from the hill." Now, this be the verse, the start of the fifth line, is very likely the source of Larkin's title. And the sentiment is not so very different either. In fact, there's a kind of a pessimistic attitude, an extreme kind of nostalgia that we find throughout, that strongly marks British poetry. We see it as well in the poet A.E. Housman, a near contemporary of Stevenson's. For instance, in his poem From a Shropshire Lad, the 32nd poem: "From far, from eve and morning and yon 12-winded sky, the stuff of life to knit me blew hither. Here am I. Now for a breath I tarry, nor yet disperse apart. Take my hand, quick, and tell me, what have you in your heart? Speak now, and I will answer. How shall I help you? Say. Ere to the wind's 12 quarters I take my endless way." Now, all of these poems, I would argue, not least Larkin's, are part of this pessimistic attitude that so strongly marks British poetry. I'd encourage you, look at these again and take some time to reflect on them. You might wish to post some remarks on the discussion board. Please familiarize yourself with that. We'll be using the discussion board quite extensively during the course, and just about every week I'll be looking for some contributions from you. Very well. Until we meet again.